Hey, what's up guys? Little man of the big opinion here. I don't know how early in the video I need to say the word World War III for more people to click on it. But we're getting more new stuff that kind of leans into that. So if you want to be caught up and, situationally aware, Iran and the United States have some peace talks going on. The United States is moving the Gerald R. Ford closer to Iran. We already have one carrier group in the area. Someone was saying, we've got close to 30% of our Navy situated in this area now. That is dense. I've never had this one, but it's a pretty dense bar. I wanted to eat most of that bite because I paused the video and spent the next like 18 seconds chewing on it. It's not their best one, it's not their worst one, but it's our breakfast. We're getting our 20 grams of protein. So moving aircraft carriers closer gives the president and the U.S. more options, especially from a military standpoint. Trump said if they started killing protesters, then we're going to go in and do something about it. And, this is kind of posturing. Iran is doing live fire exercises with Russia, which, it's kind of like, hey, I'm going to go, to the local park with my big brother and his friends because I know other people at the park have been picking on me. So if they see me, playing with these bigger dudes, maybe they'll step down. Which is why I say the word World War III, because Russia's probably looking at this from the standpoint of, we're more aligned with Iran. We want to shore up the buddies that we're going to have in a fight. There was a woman pointing out that her husband wasn't supposed to go on deployment for another like 6 or 8 months. His unit was like ramping up this process. And then she came out and told the world like, hey, he's getting activated in 2 weeks. They basically put everything else aside and said, be ready in 2 weeks. We're shipping out. The military does this stuff all the time. So it really could just be a, hey, the unit told us we're getting ready for deployment and gave us this really long time period. And then they shortened it really fast and it can be a part of the training process. It's like in schools. Some schools will tell you, hey, we're having a drill today. We're not going to tell you what time. So you can't, when they tell you, hey, it's going to happen at 10 o'clock, you can kind of prop stuff and get ready for it. And some of our drills, they don't tell us anything. And a lot of the times, we treat it like whatever the drill is. So something like that could just be that. But the prediction markets say, we're going to start launching missiles soon. The prediction markets are saying Israel is going to get involved with this one, which means if they're using resources and tying up, personnel with this, that can increase the likelihood of other people that don't like Israel to do something. You know, anytime you can create a multi-front problem, it makes it harder for that group. You know, if we've got 30% of our Navy in this area, is China going to finally decide to do something? You know, number of warships wise, they've got more than us. We still haven't beat out in tonnage and, you know, missile capability and, you know, better tech. But, you know, if the U.S. was going to try to do a multi-front, you know, engagement, it's going to be very similar to World War II, where it took us several years to really ramp up production. And it was easier during that time period because, you know, we had a massive manufacturing base that they really just had to retool machines to pump out the military stuff that we needed. This go around, we could probably not even be at full capacity, you know, producing all of our stuff by the time some conflict was over. And on the home front side of things, you know, 5% of the population would probably go through it with minor inconveniences. The rest of us, you know, that's half the reason why you prep. You want to stay as close to normal as you can. The average everyday person is not going to be able to cope, not going to be able to, you know, make the sacrifices that previous generations had to. You know, there's a couple of things, you know, in our civilian economy that if you got rid of them or did a major drawback because of shipping lane issues, or we're putting more of this into the war effort because soldiers got to eat, people would probably lose their mind. You know, chocolate was I'm losing the word here. Chocolate was rationed. They wanted to give chocolate to the soldiers because they are fighting in combat, and that's a little sweet treat that'll help with morale and make them not lose their minds. Sugar, gas, you know, all of these staples that, we go crazy in Texas when there's a snowstorm, and, you know, there's a week of disruption from that. That's a localized, regional thing that if global combat happens, or global war, that's going to go across the nation. You know, I feel like as polarized as things are, you know, whether you like Trump or not, you know, if he came out and said, you know, FDR asked the people to grow a victory garden, you know, we want you to try to produce, you know, 5 to 20% of your food. That way the food that the farmers are producing, you know, because we have to increase what we're providing food-wise to our military by, you know, let's say 40%. But we want that number up to 60 because we're also helping to feed our allies. You know, Great Britain's getting bombed into oblivion. They probably, you know, I don't know the exact numbers, but they had farms that zero food is coming out of because it got destroyed. And there'd probably be a group of people in the U.S. saying, you asked me to do that, I don't like you, so no, I'm not going to do that. And when people go hungry, then that's when you get localized riots going on. You know, I think about my coffee. I'm really glad I've got probably about 6 months worth of coffee, you know, to make a pot every single morning. You know, like a little 4 or 6 cup pot. That could be something that just disappears completely, because it's not just the countries involved in fighting, it's getting your resources back and forth. It's, are they going to get dragged into something, because you're seen as helping someone else, so we're just going to batten down the hatches and, wait for this thing to, run its course, kind of thing. I mean, it would turn into a global logistical nightmare that, you're going to have 3 or 4 major players on both sides. You're going to have a dozen or so minor players. This go around, you're also probably going to have a few dozen localized conflicts where country A and country B don't care about, the major thing going on, but the majors are worried about the major stuff. We're going to deal with our border dispute that we've had for 30 years. Or, just the idea of territorial gain. My military is stronger than theirs, and the international community, the governing bodies, are more focused on the, it's like the title weight fight. Most people watch and pay attention to that one over the prelims. This is why we continue to stack food. If you're adding 1 day's worth of food a week, you're doing better than most. If you are spending time learning skills, practicing them, like we're going camping for spring break. I'm actually camping like 7 of the 10 days, but I'm going with my family, I'm doing stuff with scouts, and then I'm doing stuff with friends. That's the perfect time to practice these skills. Do it as a family. That's your evening activity. Start working out. I've been posting my workout stuff. I do upper body with my cousin 3 days a week. He doesn't do lower body with me because he's in a wheelchair, but that's besides the point. We're getting better. A lot of my family is being a lot more physically active and eating better. This needs to go across your mag, across every single person you know. It's not just a prepping thing. Every single person in the U.S. could do with 20 minutes of extra, cardio. 2 or 3 days of physical training in some form or fashion. I can't tell you exactly what to do because every single person's different. That's why we're getting a rowing machine, so that my cousin can do some cardio. He knows he needs to do cardio, but if you typed in YouTube, best cardio, to lose weight, and increase your VO2 max, they're going to say like running, cycling, swimming. So every single person is different. Any amount of physical, exertion is going to be better than zero. If a global conflict were to kick off, this go around, I think stuff might happen on U.S. soil. I don't know what, but I want to be in the best position possible. That's, security, food, water, physically, mentally, spiritually, all of these sort of things. And you gotta start somewhere. So, let me know in the comment section down below what you're doing to be prepared. If you hadn't heard about this story, let me know. I'll keep doing these, almost daily news kind of things. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this stuff. Share it with all of your friends and family. We went up like 10 subscribers this week. I thought that was pretty cool. So let's keep that momentum going. Ask your questions. I do my best to comment on all the comments or turn your question into a video itself. But all that being said, I'll catch you in the next one.